aspiring pattern makers and my future fashion designers. Do you have the urge to sew but don't know where to start or even how to start? You may want to learn how to sew so that your ultimate goal is to make your own clothes, or it could be just simply to know how to alter garments that you already have that is not fitting well. Well, guess what? I'm here to take you through the simple steps that will get you started. First and foremost, if your goal is to make your own clothes, it's going to take a lot of time and patience. Sewing is a technique that requires patience and practice. And once you are practicing on a consistent basis, then you will get good at it. You are going to need a sewing machine, and I would suggest that you do not purchase an industrial sewing machine as a beginner to this sewing game. No, you need to purchase a regular home sewing machine that you can put on a table or a desk. Once you have that sewing machine, you are going to go through the manual and get familiarized with the different parts of the sewing machine and also how to sew on the machine. The first step to getting started with sewing is that you need to know how to sew on a straight line. And the first and easiest way to get started is to get a loose leaf paper. And why am I saying a loose leaf paper? Because the loose leaf paper has lines on it already, and in order for you to learn how to sew straight, you can follow the lines and sew on top of the line. Now, to do this, you don't have to have your sewing machine threaded. You can simply go ahead and just not thread the machine and just freely sew along the lines all down the paper until you have mastered sewing on the line and sewing straight. Now, I must say to you that there is a seam allowance guide on every sewing machine, and you can use that as a guide for your 1/4 inch or your 1/2 inch or your 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, and that is there for the purpose of sewing straight. Now, when you are sewing using your seam allowance guide, you should focus on this line for that seam allowance, whether it's the 1/4 inch one or it's the 1/2 inch. You should focus on that and not on the fabric. Put your focus on the seam allowance guide. Now, the next step that you need to do after you have sewn on the loose leaf paper and you're ready to take this now to the actual fabric. So what I would suggest for you to do, step 2, is to get a striped fabric or a fabric with stripes, and then you are going to also thread your sewing machine this time around, and you are going to sew along the stripes, or what we say, the lines. Another option, if you don't have any striped fabric, is that you can get a regular fabric, could be cotton or could be linen, any fabric, and you can draw lines on there with your tailored chalk and use that as a guide to practice staying on the line as you sew along. Now, after you've done that, you can move on to the third step. Now, the third step now is to cut 2 pieces of fabric. Once you cut those 2 pieces of fabric, you're going to put them together, and now you're actually ready to take that to another level, and you're going to sew on those 2 pieces of fabric, kissing together, which it doesn't matter if they're right side together or wrong side together, because this is ultimately for practicing purposes. You can cut these 2 pieces of fabric whether in the shape of a rectangle or a square. You can practice going down the side, and then once you go down the line, you can do a 1/4 inch first, and then you can turn around, come down again, and do another stitching beside that. You can do it a 1/4 of an inch, so you actually now is using that last stitch that you just made as a guide, as opposed to using the seam allowance to guide you coming down straight. So you practice that, and you will end up with many lines of 2 stitches on that piece of fabric. Now after you've done so, then you can take this now to another level. Actually maybe create a pouch. In order to create a pouch, you can simply get a long rectangular fabric. It could be say 20 inches by 6 inches, and you can fold it in two. So now you're going to have 10 inches by 6 inches. You can choose to either sew on both sides coming down and end at the folded end, and you have the other end open, and you can turn that out to create that pouch or a bag. Another option is that you can use that same rectangular fabric, the 20 by 6 inches. When you fold it, instead of sewing along the two edges coming down, you can literally sew in an L shape, meaning that you're sewing down the shorter side and then coming across to the longer side and create that L shape. So now you have a wider bag at the top, which the width now is going to be the 10 inches. Another option is that you don't have to get a rectangular fabric that is 20 inches long and then by 6 inches. You can get two pieces that are going to be 10 inches by 6 inches, or you can do say an 8-inch by 6-inch. Once you do that, you cut those two pieces, then you are going to sew in a U shape. So that means you're sewing down one side, which is the 8 inches coming down, going across, which is the 6 inches, and then going the other edge, turning it around, and that is going to be your other 8 inches. Now, one thing I must say to you, when you are sewing with the two pieces of fabric together, you must make sure that you keep the needle of the sewing machine down into the fabric, even if you're pausing, and also if you are going to turn to continue sewing in another direction. It is very important that you do this, because if you don't, then by turning, you're going to lose where you were and you're going to end up with a crooked stitch in that area, and you don't want that to happen. So make sure that you are turning the knob on your machine slowly to make sure that your needle is being anchored into the fabric when you're pausing, and also when you are turning to stitch in the other direction. Another thing that you need to do when you are stitching the two pieces of fabric together is that you need to start with the back stitching at the beginning of the stitch and also the back stitching at the end of the stitch. Every sewing machine is different. Some has a lever like this. The industrial sewing machine has a lever. You pull down on the lever to do the back stitching. And if you have a home sewing machine, then you will have that little area where you either pull the knob down or a latch you pull down to do the back stitching. So back stitching is very important when you are doing your stitching, to hold that stitching in place. Now, if you did not do your back stitching, obviously it's not the end of the world. You can separate the two threads and then do a tie, then do another tie, and that will be good for two ties to hold that stitching right there. Another thing that you can do, if you did not do the back stitching and you did not do the double tie, you can simply create a knot. You're going to hold the two threads together and just create that knot like when you're knotting a rope, and then you pull it down to the end of the stitch to secure it right there. It is your choice if you want to use a double tie at the beginning of the stitching or at the ending, or if you simply want to create a knot if you did not use the back stitching technique at the beginning or the end of the stitch. But you must choose one of those three techniques so that you can secure your stitch together and you don't want to have it ravel out if you are making a garment and you had to press it open, and for some reason you want to make sure that At the beginning of the stitch is being secured, and at the end of the stitch that stitch is being secured. Another thing that you need to know is that you need to know how to iron your seam allowances. You're either going to open your seam allowances and you are going to press your seams open. You press it from the wrong side and then you turn it over and you press it from the right side. The other option is that you can iron all your seam allowances to one side. Your choice. So it's up to you if you want to iron it to one side or you want to have your seam allowance open. Now once you have done so, then you can continue practicing this, and if you want to create that little pouch, you can turn over the edge, the raw edge at the top of the pouch or the bag, and you can turn it once, baste it or pin it, whether you want to use a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, or if you want to use a 3/4 inch or 1 inch. If you are going to use a rope or ribbon that's going to go through that pouch so that you can create that drawstring, then you might want to do either say a 1/2 inch or more, depending on the width of your ribbon or the cord that you're using to pull that top together. So remember now, it's all about practicing and having patience. And when you're sewing, you're going to take your time, and as you go along, you're going to develop more speed and starting to sew faster. Now the reason I also stated for you to first start with a home sewing machine is because normally those sewing machine doesn't go as fast as the industrial sewing machine, and as a beginner you don't want to get carried away on the industrial sewing machine and you are going to run into trouble. So you're building up speed on your home sewing machine, getting the gist of everything, and you are off on a great speed, and then you can later invest into an industrial sewing machine. Now I spoke about clean finishing the end or the opening of that pouch or bag that you're making. Now if you're looking for a bag that is not going to have the drawstring, then you can have straps on that bag. All you have to do, you can make your straps say 1 inch wide by say 20 inches long, or whatever desired length you want. So all you have to do, if you want that width of the strap to be 1 inch, then times that by 2, that's 2 inches, and then give yourself 1/4 inch seam allowances on both sides, or 1/2 inch, but I prefer 1/4 inch is fine. So then you need to cut that rectangle 2.5 inches wide for the 1/4 inch. If you are using 1/2 inch seam allowance, then you need to cut that 3 inches wide and your desired length. What you're going to do, you're going to fold it in two so you have all the edges together, and then you're going to sew down, and because it's going to be a strap, then you're going to use a safety pin or a looper, and you are going to turn that strap over to the right side, and then you are going to iron it and attach it to your bag that you've just made. So that would complete your bag. Another suggestion I would make to you is that you can get a plain piece of fabric. It could be a yard of fabric, and create a scarf or a shawl, and that is another way you can practice doing your hem. So what you'll do for that purpose is that you're going to use a 1/4 inch, or you can do a little bit less than a 1/4 inch for your turning purposes. So you can probably do say 3/16 of an inch, or simply 1/8 inch. Remember now, 3/16 is a little bit bigger than 1/8. It's actually between 1/8 and a 1/4 inch. So you can turn the edge over, pin it or baste it, and then turn it again. Then you can pin it or baste it, whichever you prefer. Take it to the machine, and when you are sewing that hem or the edge, clean finishing the edge, what you have to do is, if you have pinned that area, make sure that you're removing the pin before your needle get to the pin. Your needle will break, and you don't want that to happen. Or if your needle doesn't break and that needle hit that pin, it might make that needle blunt at the end, and you don't want that to happen. So please be on the alert with that. So now that you know how to create a pouch or create a bag, you can also go further and create a pillowcase, which is not far from a pouch. It's just the same concept like a pouch, but instead of having that drawstring at the top, you now have that clean finish edge at the top, and you're making something much bigger on a bigger scale. You can actually use those pouches and store your shoes in them, or if you're traveling and you need to travel with your shoes in a bag, and there you go, you have a shoe bag that you can carry when you are traveling. Not only can you use the pouch for a shoe bag, you can create smaller little pouches if you want to store anything that is of a small quantity, or it could be for your sunglasses, because I like to do that. If I have a lot of sunglasses, I like to make those little pouches and just tuck my sunglasses in there. And I like to use the transparent fabric, whether it's going to be the organza or chiffon. I need you to now know how to sew a dart. So you can get a piece of fabric and you create a V there, because the dart is in the shape of a V, and you can use a tailor's chalk to just create that V. If you are a beginner at sewing, I would suggest that you also create the center line for that V, because that is what is going to be your fold line. So once you have that, fold along that fold line, and then you are going to pin along the side or the slant which created a V. And when you pin your dart, then you can take it to the sewing machine and you can practice sewing the darts. So once you know how to sew on a straight line, and you know how to sew two fabrics together, and also know how to sew a dart, you can now go into the next project, which is to make yourself an actual garment. And I would suggest that you can start out with a skirt. Before you even start with the skirt, you can also cut a piece of fabric with a little bit of curve towards the top and start learning to sew on a curve. So once you learn how to sew on a curve using your seam allowance guide on the sewing machine, you're ready to get into sewing yourself a skirt. And I would suggest that in order for you to make the skirt, you should first make your own pattern. So in order for you to make the pattern, I would first suggest that you go back and watch this video on how to create the sloper for a skirt. And after you've created the sloper, you can now move on to the other video, which is how to use that sloper and create a skirt pattern. So with that being said, I hope that this video has helped you tremendously. And now that you know how to actually start sewing, you will go ahead and get yourself out there, get that urge going, start creating little things such as a bag, a pouch, a pillow, or I should say pillowcase, or you can even make a duvet cover. Now that you also know how to sew a hem, you can take that along with your knowledge of knowing how to sew a dart and simply take it to a garment whereby you can sew yourself a skirt. I hope you will not just look at the sewing machine, but you will take it out on a daily basis and you will practice. Practice, practice, practice. Patience, patience, patience. I now urge you to go ahead, whip out your sewing machine and get started. Start on those little projects and then migrate to sewing an actual garment for yourself. Guess what? If you have not yet subscribed, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you like what you see, go ahead and share it to others around the world so they too can know how to get started with sewing. It is a skill that is very, vital, because you not only know how to sew your own clothes, but you can create little projects around the house or do some alteration on garments that you already have that need some alterations to be done to them. Don't just sit there and take your garments to the dry cleaners and asking someone to alter for you. Start somewhere. It is that little start, and months and weeks will go by as you practice and you will get good at it. Sewing is something that doesn't come overnight. Takes patience and practice, and you too will get good at it. Thank you for watching, and see you soon on the next video to come.